Paul is saying this doesn't come from the Lord, but this is my earthly wisdom. This is what I have to offer you. He makes the distinction. We have to do the same. Follow his example. Welcome to Teach Through the Word. This is the Bible Teachers Podcast. Kris Langham with you again, and once again, all by my lonesome today. Jonathan and Peyton are out for our basic training series. This week, we are back again in Series 2 of Basic Training for Bible Teachers. This one is called The Calling of the Teacher, and today on Day 3, we're going to give you your essential of preparation. Today's preparation essential is flow. That ever so important process of creating flow in and through your message. But first, I got to read the intro. This is the Bible Teachers Podcast. We are here to equip you, Bible teacher, to do what you do better and together with you to elevate the craft of Bible teaching. Get equipped, get trained, and while you're at it, get a behind-the-scenes look here at Through the Word. All right, let's get to it. Creating message flow. The first thing that you have to understand about your role as the Bible teacher. A Bible teacher is a storyteller. People like the Bible professor well enough, but they engage when you tell a story, especially if you're a good storyteller. Most of the Bible is a storybook. Why would we teach it like it's a textbook? When you were in school, think back. Did you ever have a teacher who just told great stories? When you get home at the end of the day and your mom asks you what you learned in school today, algebra, gone. Grammar, gone. But the story your teacher told always stuck. Now, on the other hand, we also all had those English teachers who had a remarkable ability to ruin good stories by over-dissecting them. Bible teacher, you are teaching a book, not giving a book report. Those are very different things. Tell the story and tell it well. And a good story has good flow. Even a good argument, even if you're teaching where it's not a narrative, say you're teaching one of the epistles, teaching through Romans, which is a series of arguments making a case. A lawyer making an argument uses flow to their message. Whether your message is topical, apologetic, whatever you're teaching, every message must flow clearly and cleanly so that your audience can follow and understand. Good flow keeps the audience engaged. It enables them to always know the context, to see the connections between cause and effect, between argument and conclusion, question and answer, gospel and salvation. Good flow means that they can follow the plot, know the characters, and they can find themselves in the story and see God revealed. So you must plan flow when you prepare your message. It is crucial. One of the most common mistakes for new preachers is a message without flow. They have lots of good points, but no clear connections between those points. They tell good stories, but they don't help the audience match the story with the text or the teaching. All of those great points they make are lost on the audience. So, how do you create flow? Well, let's start with the backbone. Question number 1 is, what will form the backbone of your message flow? What do you build on? For me, as I'm teaching through the text in an expositional message, the Bible text itself is the backbone of my message flow. It's already there in the text. It's predetermined. I'm just going to follow the flow of this passage that I'm teaching. Now, I recognize that topical messages are different. A topical message is built on a series of points, all supporting a primary point. So you build your message together with a flow of thought that walks through those points. That's great, but it's not what I'm talking about for this. I personally get so much more out of teaching through the text itself and find that I get more and my audience gets more as I allow the text to be my backbone or anchor to my message. Personal preference. Now, I know that to make the text clear, I might not go 100% in order, verse by verse, word by word. I might have to skip ahead or skip back for the sake of clarity and context. Sometimes if my message flow is here, but all of this part of an argument, say in an epistle, is really anchored on explaining something that was a chapter back, of course, I'm going to go back there. I'm going to include that in my flow and make sure I've still got that anchor, even if I'm referring to last week's message. I might have so I'll skip around and sometimes place a couple verses out of order just so you know, well, this is the anchor verse, but then I'll place it back in its order. All that to say, I still make the primary backbone of my message the text itself. Now, some of you will disagree with me. Feel free to email Peyton Jones no, just kidding. But if you want to know how I teach, this is how I do it. And I should clarify that the text by itself is not your entire flow. That would be just a running commentary. If that was your only backbone to your teaching, you would just be doing a commentary verse by verse. That's not a sermon, but it's good for what it is if you just want to give a running commentary, but it's not the same thing. So moving on, question 2. Where in the process of your study and preparation do you plan your flow? Do you just open the gates and say, I'm going to write down an outline? No, you got to study first. But as you study, do you do it before you write your message? Do you create flow as you go along? Here's what my process looks like. More or less, changes up each time a little bit. For me, I like to use a printed text. I copy and paste the Bible text onto an empty document with lots of on blank paper with lots of room for notes. And I have a special way to do it. I can show you that another time. But the key there is I've got a printed text where I can write. I've got a lot of margin and separation between the lines where I can write a lot of notes while I'm studying. So I print it out, I study, and I take notes and I write some ideas. I'm writing ideas as I go along. I notice something is a keyword. You guys know I love to do my color coding, underline keywords. Sometimes I'll open a Bible dictionary and I'll get a definition. If that's really useful for teaching that, I'll write it just underneath that word or in the margin. And then after I've studied a bit, I'll read a commentary. Again, I'm writing down some key observations in my notes that I pull from the commentary. And I even write down ideas for how I might explain it. While I'm studying, I might get a great teaching idea. I'm going to put that in my notes as I go. This is a great thing about having my printed text is it allows me to write some ideas that are just my own insights, but I actually have a separate space on the page where I'm going to teach this, or I'll color code it in yellow and orange, or color codes I know for myself. Like I'm actually going to teach that. It's not just a note I took. So I'm writing down ideas for how to explain it. I think of stories I want to tell. I'll put that in the margin as well. Tell the dog story or whatever story I might have. Write down some word definitions for clarity, cross references, notes, repetitions. All of that goes into study time, but some of what I've written will make it in the message. Some of it will not. So I usually what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll highlight the beginning of each part. And when I decide, okay, that actually is going to make it into something I want to teach. But at some point, I realize that I've landed on the heart of God's message here. In this passage, when I find the heart, I write it down. I stop all my other study. I want to clarify the core message of the text. I'll clarify it, rewrite it until I've really captured it clearly and succinctly. A lot of times I'll even use words that are straight out of the Bible text. I mean, the message is in there in the text. So if I'm just borrowing part of a verse or a key phrase, I want to write the core message from the text. That step is crucial because the heart of the message, God's central point in the heart of the text, will form the other backbone to your message. Yes, there are two, and they work as two rails on a ladder. Now that I have my two rails in place, the text itself and the primary central point of the text, now I can create flow for my message. So I've got these two primary anchors, these two backbones for what I'm going to teach. I begin by listing out some, now I move to another piece of paper. I start listing out the key elements that I know that I will need for the message. Here are some primary points. That might be key verses I want to focus on, or just some key points along the way. central questions I want to ask, ideas for a story, an object lesson. I just write them down. Key verses, key points, stories, object lesson ideas. I try to come up with a hook if I'm thinking about it, since I know what my core message is going to be. If I can think of it now, I'm going to write a hook that's going to start the message. And remember, a hook connects the heart of the listener with the heart of the message. If I can't think of it yet, I just leave a space for it. I also try to think of a handle, a story or object lesson or metaphor that will help my audience really grab a hold of the message. I'm going to have a whole separate message on how to write a hook, how to write a handle. But I want to create a place for it here as I'm just writing out all of my ideas. Now, I've got everything that is that I want to include in this message on this page. I look over all the stuff I want to include, and then I start ordering it. I write numbers to order it all in a clean flow that follows those two backbones, the two rails of my ladder. Now, if you're having trouble seeing this, if you're watching on the video, I actually got a picture for you that I will bring up. Now, I didn't draw this one. This is one that I got this from my mentor's mentor. Seriously, I was at a training session for pastors. The guy who taught Chuck Smith how to teach the Bible and taught so many others over the years, one of Chuck's early mentors, he drew this up. He gave this as his outline for how to prepare a message. Now, if you're listening on audio, I will do my best to give you to draw you a picture with words here. Now, what I'm looking at is a ladder posted up against a tree. That ladder is the message. It has two rails. On the left of the ladder is the text that you're going to teach to. You're going to follow through that text all the way up. The other rail that holds the ladder together is what he calls the proposition, what I called the main idea, the heart of the message. Those two are going to be your rails. As you walk up this ladder that is your message, you're going to go hand by hand, left and right, walking your way up. Now, the rungs on this ladder begin with the intro, or what I call the hook. There's got to be an introduction that brings you into, and notice your intro be connected to both the text and the central proposition. It's got to hook them in and make them want to climb the rest of this ladder with you. Then as you go up, each rung in the ladder is a point, punctuated by a point, but those points have to come from the text and be connected to the heart of the message, the proposition, the central point of the message in the text. And you go point by point. As you walk through the text, it's punctuated by a clear point. Now, this is, you say, hey, I thought you didn't like point by point message. This is a point by point message, yet it is, the points don't form. The points aren't what guide the message. The rails are the text and the central proposition that comes from the text. So you go from that. So your rungs are the intro at the bottom, and then point number one, point number two, however many points you're going to have there to get through your text, and then a conclusion or an application, and that conclusion should wrap it all together. All right, I'm gonna tuck this guy out of the way so I can see you again. So that's your flow. Now let's look back. Let's look at an example. Let's look at the flow of the messages that you heard over the last couple of days. I had to create flow even for these training messages. So the last 2 days of this series, in the basic training I did, remember I was going through the lessons in 2 Corinthians there. I normally actually do that as one study, but we're breaking up into shorter bits, so I split it apart. So let's look back at those 2 days and see how I created flow in those messages. First thing I did, I introed the topic. What does it mean to be a Bible teacher? Got to the core of the message there. And my hook was, I tried to word that in such a way that really grabbed the heart. How do you know if you're called? What do you do with that nagging feeling that you're just not good enough? I'm grabbing the heart and I'm connecting it directly to the central proposition. I also start at the very beginning with a verse, 2 Corinthians 5:11. Now, this message was different. It was a topical, because this is a training that's topical, but I wasn't going verse by verse through just one passage, but I was following verse by verse through 2 Corinthians. Not the whole book, so I had to do a little skipping. But I started in the middle with 2 Corinthians 5:11, And I picked the verse that really gets to the core of this, where it says, what we are. I chose a verse at the heart of the message. And I like to lead with a verse that makes that central message clear, but I don't explain the whole thing. I'm going to wind my way back to it. I want to show you where we're going first. Now, usually when I do this study as just one message instead of two, I open up after I've introduced a question, introduced a primary verse. I like to open up with my story. In this series you've been following, I opened with this story on day 2 instead. I told my story, the story of sitting in the Preach the Word conference. Now, of course, I chose this story because I already know from the beginning it gets to the heart of the message. But I open up the story and I share, I'm asking those same questions as a young man. But notice I left my story at a cliffhanger. That the use of a cliffhanger is really a powerful tool in message flow. And I tell the story and I essentially just switch gears back here in 2 Corinthians, and I gave the background on 2 Corinthians. Why did I do that? Why do you see it in almost every movie, in almost every TV show, especially if there's any suspense, especially if they're doing some good storytelling? They will leave you on a cliff and wondering what's happened and then guide you over here and then bring you back. And they'll weave those things together. So watch how I did it in the message. I said, okay, hold that for a second. Back here in 2 Corinthians, and I gave the background to 2 Corinthians, the story behind the text. I did a little Bible storying, walking through the story of Paul and why he's writing this message. Then I walk through the verses themselves, explaining each verse and telling the story as I go. Now we're going the rungs of the ladder that are following the text, but keeping a clear hold on the central point, the central question. I explain clearly, verse by verse, punctuating occasionally with a key point. It's important to have those punctuation moments, those moments where I've made a conclusion here. This is something to grab a hold on, write a note with, so that you're not just running the same monotone message. Everything has the same. You've got to stop for a moment and say, look, here's a point. We've answered something. We're moving forward in our thought process. Then at just the right time, I return to that personal story I told. Just about the time you completely forgot that you were wondering what's going to happen, I say, meanwhile, back on the cliff. Now, at this point, it's usually towards the end of the message. It's a critical point where I weave together all 3 strands, the Bible text, my personal story, and the central question of the message. I close off my story by returning to the scripture itself. Notice that story ended with 2 Corinthians 3, 5, and 6. Now, of course, conveniently, that's a story that did end in 2 Corinthians 3, 5, and 6. So, of course, I planned it there. But when I tell a story, I want to wrap it back into the text itself and use that to answer the core question that we were asking for. What does it mean to be a Bible teacher? What if I feel like I'm not good enough? And I wrapped it together, all 3 in one. I close it up with a ending exhortation and land the plane. So essential for good flow. Don't hit the runway and bounce back up again. Novice teachers, this is a classic where you're not sure exactly how to close it. You just bounce back up on another topic. You got to land the plane. So with that was my example, how I created flow for the last couple days. I want to finish out this training with a little finishing up with how to weave a message. You'll notice there that I wove 3 things together: the main question, the Bible text, and that story, my personal story. Weaving a message requires timing, and it's an essential skill to good storytelling. That is alternating between your story, the Bible story, and commentary, a question, with each one weaving in and out together. Nearly every movie, book, TV show that you watch does this. You'll see several storylines going side by side, and they'll weave together. One of the best around is This Is Us. Fantastic show where they're weaving past, present, and future, several storylines, but they'll weave together with one central theme. So as you do that for the word, one of the keys is the cliffhanger. Cliffhanger is a powerful tool in creating flow. You tell a story up to a critical moment then you switch the storyline. Meanwhile, back on the ranch. Cliffhanger is key. It's also essential that you have an anchor. As you weave, you need one of those threads to be your anchor thread, the primary driver of the flow. You don't want them all competing, all pulling each other apart. There needs to be something that kind of guides your anchors your flow. For me, I prefer to let the Bible be my anchor thread about 90% or more of the time. I occasionally will teach a message where I let my story be the anchor. But that technically is really more of a testimony than it is a Bible study. And that's valid. Testimonies are powerful. I have taught testimonies when I've been invited to teach, but I got to recognize that the testimony is the anchor, and there are Bible text. The Bible text is coming into that, but the story is keeping me anchored. You got to know which one is your anchor, so that's going to guide your flow. You can, of course, let a topic or a question be the anchor. That's a topical study. Personally, I don't like it as much, but of course I do teach them. This training series is primarily topical messages. But I find that the message that is anchored in a topic rather than the scripture is so prone to be driven by the opinions and preconceptions of the teacher, whether it's me or someone else. And it can often be abused by the teacher, so that what they're really doing is using the Bible to give authority to what's really just their own philosophy. I know I'm stepping on some toes here, but this is my genuine concern with topical studies. If you lean primarily on topical studies, and I see it a lot, if you present yourself as a Bible teacher, but then you stand in the pulpit with your philosophy on marriage or dating or money or whatever your topic is, and then you weave in just enough Bible verses so that what your audience hears is, "Thus saith the Lord," and then you go on with your ideas, that is a deception. And I believe we will be held accountable for it. And this is what we do. We have a topic. Here's my ideas. Here's my philosophy on it. And we add a Bible verse. And from our audience's perspective, if they're not savvy enough, they think, oh, that Bible verse means all this stuff is from God. And you'll find a legalism comes with that, because they'll think that your philosophy is held at the same level as the Bible verse that you brought in. If you're going to do that, you got to make it a clear distinction between this is biblical authority, and over here, this is my ideas on how to apply it. That's great, but you better teach that clearly so they know the difference. You have a responsibility to distinguish between your ideas and biblical truths and foundation. Even Paul does that in the Bible itself. In 1 Corinthians, he says, there's times the Lord saith this, and then he says, I say, and not the Lord, but I think I have wisdom too. What a great example. It's such a weird verse to read. Like, wait, this is scripture. Paul is saying this doesn't come from the Lord, but this is my earthly wisdom. This is what I have to offer you. He makes the distinction. We have to do the same. Follow his example. So much damage has been done in the church by dating books, money seminars, science debates, where the majority of the content is opinion or just tradition or personal conviction, but they use just enough Bible verses to add the Lord's apparent stamp of approval. And unless you've trained your audience to make the distinction, you're responsible for that. Okay, soapbox done, but I share that here because we're talking about flow and that essential decision about what will be the anchor thread as you weave your elements and create your outline. That decision really will guide what your audience takes away. If you make it clear that the Bible is your anchor, they'll walk away knowing, okay, that was a Bible study, not just his philosophy. If you consistently choose the Bible text as the anchor, then the message will be the Lord's, and you'll train your audience to know the difference. Okay, I know some of you won't like that. That's okay. Again, email Peyton Jones at, I can't decide what, because I don't actually want you to email Peyton. But anyway, think about it. Right now, you're asking yourself, is that just Kris's opinion on how to teach, or is that a biblical mandate? And you're wondering that because I didn't anchor that with a scripture. So yeah, that was just my opinion. But as Paul says, I believe that I too have wisdom. So think it over, decide for yourself what's right on this one, and go with your conviction, but I've given you my 2 cents. As for me, I find my messages are so much stronger and deeper and more faithful to God's message if I allow the text itself to be the anchor thread in my message flow. All right, guys, that'll do it for day 3 in our basic training series, our basic training number 2 series. If you do want a practical example, if you want to hear how I've incorporated flow in a message, one of my favorites where I really worked hard on the flow was a series on faith. Yes, a topical series, but I anchored it in the text of Hebrews chapter 11. And that is our Bible Basics Explained series. You can find that on YouVersion or on the Through the Word app. And what I did there is I grabbed multiple stories that wove together from communist Romania. I had grabbed those from the Voice of the Martyrs. I found a series of stories that I thought worked really well for this message on faith. And I actually wove them. In my original teaching, I actually did that all in one study. But in the 5 messages on Bible Basics Explained Faith, listen through and pay attention to the weaving. Pay attention to how the Bible text, the central questions on faith itself, and the stories from Romania all weave together and all come together in the final episode. So if you want to see example, check that one out. But that will do it for day 3 in our basic training series. Thanks for joining us to teach through the Word. This has been the Bible Teachers Podcast. Tomorrow on day 4, we will jump into Essentials of Delivery as we walk through knowing your authority in the pulpit. And in part 5, we'll talk about Bible storytelling. Each week here at Teach Through the Word, we bring you one Bible book or one basic training or one guest teacher interview as we equip you, Bible teacher, to do what you do better and together with you, elevate the craft of Bible teaching. We'll see you next time.